But as you look at the South Lawn,
what's going on, and that's an incredibly large effort. On the other side, there's the investigation, which is unfolding, processing probably the largest crime scene in U.S. history, certainly larger than the Oklahoma City bombing, or even the first World Trade Center bombing, or in this case, because of the size of those two buildings, the twin embassy bombings in East Africa.
Yeah, and that's the Pentagon we're looking at this morning. And I'm sorry, but we have more bad news. Lisa Stark, who covers aviation from us, reports in from Seattle that 2 United flights have now crashed. Now, just so we don't lose track of the numbers, we told you the United Flight 93 going from New York to San Francisco crashed outside Pittsburgh today. We believe now, according to our aviation sources, that United Flight 175, which was a 767 destined to go from Boston to Los Angeles, has crashed, and we do not know where. So we have 4 major commercial aircraft which have been involved in either accidents or violence today. We have the 2 at the trade towers in New York City. We're not certain, but we believe both those are somehow connected to American Airlines, but we're not sure of that, absolutely sure. And that news conference in Dallas a few minutes ago didn't shed much light on the subject. And we have 2 United Airlines flights involved in crashes. We do not know the circumstances of those crashes. One of them flying from New York, just outside New York, to San Francisco, and the other flying from Boston to Los Angeles. And we may or may not have another aircraft because we have no certainty yet what the aircraft was, who it belonged to, really what size it was, that penetrated the outer ring of the Pentagon this morning, right through to the inner ring of the Pentagon's courtyard there, and caused what ABC's Jack McQuethy called heavy casualties there. So we have 4 significant commercial aircraft carrying, in some cases, well more than 100 passengers who've all been involved in acts of violence on purpose or otherwise today. And Mayor Giuliani, the mayor of New York, who will probably get a better feel of this before anybody else at the moment, has now described a tremendous number of lives lost in the New York the attack on the New York trade towers, and it doesn't come as any great surprise to anybody. The mayor begins to give us some sense of magnitude which is beyond that which we are merely speculating and or talking about, even though we know that many lives have been lost. And ABC's John McKenzie, who's just a couple of blocks away from the World Trade Center at a makeshift fire command center. Look at that again. I mean, it is stunning. John McQuethy at that makeshift fire command center has had a battalion commander tell him that as many as 200 firefighters are principally unaccounted for. So it is no wonder that all across the country today, at airports and at public sites, many which have been closed from the west all the way across to the east, people are holding their breath. Don't wish to be melodramatic about it, are holding their breath as to whether or not there is one more, or should I say, another incident to come. And that was because the shock was so profound watching on television as we did this morning to see the second aircraft come in and crash into the other of the twin trade towers, there it is, which have now both collapsed. And it is, in some ways, a reminder of what happened when the Challenger exploded. And the constant repetition of the explosion of the Challenger on Challenger space shuttle just drove it into our collective consciousness all across the nation. What we had witnessed together, though were clearly unable to feel in the same way as those people in the immediate area. I just want to pick up some other reaction coming from around the country and around the world. It's very interesting, the reaction we've had immediately, officially, from the highest ranks of the Palestinian Authority and from Afghanistan. I think we can hear Chairman Arafat, Yasser Arafat, in just a moment, but the Taliban ambassador to Pakistan, it is in Afghanistan where the United States believes Osama bin Laden has been most carefully given sanctuary, if not protected by the Taliban. But the Taliban ambassador to Pakistan has condemned what he called terrorist attacks on the United States on Tuesday. He said in a dispatch from Reuters out of Islamabad in Pakistan, this is a terrorism act and we strongly condemn it. And then from Kabul itself, the capital of Afghanistan, a spokesman for the rulers there said that the Saudi dissident, Osama bin Laden is a Saudi Arabian citizen, could not be responsible for a spate of terror attacks in the United States. I don't understand that particularly, but here's the quote from him. It says, what happened in the United States was not a job of ordinary people. It could have been the work of governments. Osama bin Laden cannot do this work, neither us, said the Taliban spokesman to the Reuters news agency in Kandahar, which is a city in the southern part of Afghanistan. This could have been the act of either internal enemies of the United States or its major rivals. Now, there are a couple things. John Miller talked to me about this because you've been to Afghanistan. You went to see Osama bin Laden. In every organization, anywhere in the world where governments or organizations have been somehow connected to terrorism in the United States mind, acting real or not, people are just waiting. There's going to be some kind of response to this. When Osama bin Laden blew up those embassies, I guess it was before you went into Afghanistan, they attacked his camps. They didn't get him.
They sent 75 cruise missiles at $1 million apiece into his camps based on intelligence that he would be meeting there with his leadership.
Right.
He was not there, and they didn't get him. They destroyed his camps. I think that at the time or point that the government and the Bush administration identifies, not to the standard, and this is the way they've been working, not to the standard you would need to prove in court, but to the satisfaction of the administration that they know who's responsible. They will not deal with this as a criminal matter first, but as a military one first, and retaliate against someone somewhere. Too early to say who. One of the things about bin Laden that is so misunderstood, and his name has come up a few times today, is how he actually operates. More so than launching these operations himself at his direction from his own organization, and there are instances where he's charged with doing exactly that. In many more of the cases, especially of operations they shut down, the U.S. government takes the position that he's basically a foundation, that any terrorist group can approach him and say, we want to go to work. He'll provide the training, the financing, and then send them off to do their work, essentially with grant money, seed money, training, logistical support. So it doesn't necessarily have to be him to have his fingerprints on it.
Fires are still burning in the Pentagon, no surprise there. As John McCarthy and Barbara Starr both reported for us, this building penetrated the outer ring of the Pentagon and set many offices on fire on a variety of levels, and there are about 6 or 7 stories. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stories anyway in the Pentagon today. In at least one section, they are alight. And as I said a couple of times, the Palestinian President Yasser Arafat, who's deeply engaged in a war now with the Israeli government, has also reacted very quickly to this today to express, to be perfectly honest, I haven't heard what he said, but so let's hear what he said now. This is Palestinian President Yasser Arafat.
First of all, I am offering my condolences, the condolences of the Palestinian people to the American President, President Bush, to his government, to the American people for this terrible act. We are completely shocked. Completely shocked. Unbelievable.
Now, that's the Palestinian president, chairman of the Palestine Liberation Organization, Yasser Arafat, who, as I think everybody who watches the news or reads the news these days understands, is in a very, very bitter war with the Israelis, and in which terrorism has been a factor. Palestinians see what the Israelis do to them as terrorism, and certainly the Israelis and much of the world see the Palestinian and other suicide bombers who've attacked inside Israel to be terrorism of the most gruesome order, no question about that. And so we should not be surprised, as on previous circumstances, to see Chairman Arafat expressing his condolences, but other Palestinians who believe the United States is responsible for what Israel is doing to the Palestinians, or at least complicit and is certainly supplying the Israelis arms, will be happy to see this attack of the White
vulnerability in a democratic society in
United States today. So take a look at a scene from Jerusalem not too long ago in which there is some celebration that the powerful United States has been harmed, has been seen to be vulnerable, has been hurt, I suppose, in the broadest sense of the word. And the people who go off to do this sort of thing, both in the Middle East now, you must remember that a vast majority of the population of the Middle East now, in all countries, is under 21, much of it under 15, certainly under 17, and the kind of tensity and intention, if one presumes this terrorism, one shouldn't, this terrorism has had its genesis or had its roots somewhere in the Middle East, or at least in people who are opposed, are just brimming with anger at the United States. And we are now becoming more experienced with the notion that there are young men, for the most part, who are prepared to blow themselves up along with everybody else in terms, if they can be a service to the cause, and they believe, as do some people believe about Islam, that they will, by sacrificing themselves, go on to another place. It's an unfair comment on Islam in some respects, but it is certainly a motivating factor. The hatred of the United States, and the hatred of the United States is a patron of Israel. Whether you're from Afghanistan, or whether you're from Iran, Iraq, or inside the Palestinian territories, is so intense at some levels, and has become more intense in recent months, that a great many people will not be surprised at this attack today, though, like everybody else, will be amazed at the magnitude and success of it. John McCreffy at the Pentagon. John.
Peter, we are standing outside the Pentagon at this point. It has been already a long morning for rescue workers and police here. One eyewitness I talked to, who was on this busy highway outside the Pentagon this morning, said he saw an airplane coming directly over his head. It was an American Airlines plane. He could see the number on the plane. He could almost see the passengers inside as it went along the highway, started clipping off the high wires and the different light poles along the highway, and slammed directly into the side of the Pentagon. As we said earlier, Peter, the aircraft penetrated deep inside the Pentagon. It is organized in rings from the E-ring on the outside. It penetrated all the way into the A-ring in the inner part of the Pentagon. After it burned for a number of minutes, a part of the building collapsed. By the time rescue workers could get in there, the destruction was just terrific.
John, do you have any sense of the casualties?
We don't have any sense, Peter, except the size of the medical operation that has been set up here is enormous. They are anticipating the casualties. Certainly the injured will be in the hundreds. I certainly don't want to speculate on those killed.
And John, it's a little hard to get a sense of the size sometimes for the picture. Can you describe, maybe in feet or in yards, how big a penetration this is?
The roof is collapsed, Peter. There is a chasm in the side of the Pentagon that is probably 200 or 300 feet across. From the roof of the Pentagon, there is this huge V shape that has collapsed. You can see deep inside the Pentagon from the street now.
This is into the inner courtyard of the Pentagon itself.
It's into the innermost ring of the Pentagon, Peter. I have not been able to get into the courtyard, but I was told that the penetration was all the way into the deepest ring of the Pentagon.
And John, the office building, the Pentagon is about, what, 6 stories high?
It's 5 stories above ground, Peter, and several stories below. Clearly the damage is primarily above ground, but also some of those in the lower offices. I was sitting in the Pentagon when the attack happened. I was on the opposite side of the building. It shook the entire building. It was very clear that something terrible had happened. There was chaos immediately after the attack, Peter. Secretary of Defense, I walked out with the Deputy Secretary of Defense. The Marine Corps Commandant couldn't get out the door because security had locked it. It was chaos.
Okay, John, and the fires are still burning at the moment, we believe?
They are still burning. They are mostly oil fires, it appears, Peter. The fire hoses have been on the various fires for the last several